Well, hello once again, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here on Unstoppable Mindset, wherever you happen to be. We're glad you're with us. Today we get to interview, and I hope I pronounce it right, Victoria Cumberbatch. Did I pronounce that right?
A beauteous pronunciation. Thank you for that.
What a deal. And Victoria, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm joyous.
Victoria is known for creating communities, helping people really understand a lot about being more self-aware and other things that we're going to talk about. I don't want to give it all away because she gets to talk about it.
Ooh, yes.
But you just got back from doing being part of a workshop in San Francisco. I'm jealous. I love the Bay Area, and we lived there for 12 years. But you did happen to be there in a lot of the rain.
All the rain, pretty much all the rain, start to finish. So yeah, not the best, if I do say, but I was inside. So
yeah,
you know,
so there you
are.
Yeah, yeah, me too. I don't mind. We had a little bit of rain here, but not nearly what the Bay Area has had, and not nearly what other parts of Southern California has had. But I just never understood people. Yesterday morning, I was watching the news, and there was a reporter who was at this place where a bunch of cars had drive through this deep sort of created lake of water from all the rain and got stuck. And this one guy pulls up to it, stops, looks at everybody, looks at the water, and then floors it and tries to go through. And of course, Mark Federobles, the reporter, is going, there he goes, he's going to get it. He got stuck,
obviously.
You know, there's no logic in doing that. And so anyway, even Jimmy Kimmel had a video of it last night, I understand. So
well, that is the impatience of our society right there. That is truly an example of that.
I remember when we moved to New Jersey, we were not. It was while we were building a home. My wife was in a wheelchair her whole life. And so we built a home in Westfield, but they were back. She and her parents came back. We were checking on the house and doing some other stuff. And we were looking at, we were on Route 3 and looking at this big lake of water in front of us. And we stopped because we knew that there was no way that we were going to get through. And it took about a half hour, 35 minutes before the rain let up enough for us to be able to then go through.
Wow.
Crazy world.
Oh, yeah. And in New Jersey, that's unusual.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you do? Well, tell us a little bit about you. I'd love to hear kind of your story growing up, where you're from, and all that sort of stuff to sort of set the stage, and we'll go from there.
Wow. Okay. So a robust background knowledge. Let's see. I am a only child to a set of interracial parents. Mom's Irish, dad's Bayesian, Barbados. Shout out Rihanna. In New Jersey, in North New Jersey, not to be confused with the rest of the state, which is not New Jersey. I'm ready to hear from the people that have something to say about that. And yeah, my mom was a teacher. My dad was a cop. All the men in my family were first responders at 9/11. And after, that, I went to college at the University of Maryland to study international development and conflict management, focusing on the Balkan Wars, because I had a really standout professor, Dr. Friedel, who's Croatian. And we got into some really deep conversations about that, and very full story is that now my boyfriend of 4 years is from Montenegro and came here to emigrate to this country in that last bit of the Balkan Wars, actually. So who would have ever thought that would have come full circle in that way? So I can't speak their language, but I certainly can empathize with their plight. And from there, I had always, actually, let me pause for a second. I graduated into the recession. So there was not much opportunity for me to capitalize on all the internships that I had and so on. So I had to go back home, and I got certified to teach history, actually. It was kind of like a last ditch effort to be a functioning citizen in the world. And it was with much chagrin, although history is my favorite discipline of study, and being a teacher is certainly an admirable profession, but I didn't think it was for me. So
that recession was 2008.
It was 2008. I
Yeah.
graduated in 2011,
Okay.
and like nobody was hiring
Yeah.
Bachelor of Arts. Like that
Yeah.
was cute. I certainly didn't know what I'd be getting myself into the real world. And so I was home for a while, and what I ended up doing was I would take long-term substituting positions, so maternity leave, things like that, be with a classroom for quite a while, and then I would backpack Central America, South America, the Balkans, throughout Europe for like 8 to 10 months at a time. So I would do that back and forth, probably until I was about 26 when I had my first big girl job at Steven Stiller Tunnel to Towers Foundation in Staten Island, first responder organization. And that was when I started being officially in community, but of course that was not the title that I had. It was like program development or something. And then I lasted for about a year, got my dream job at a place called Remote Year, where I oversaw a group of 50 adults who worked remotely, digital nomads, and we traveled around the world together as a group, as a community, and we moved every month for a month around the world. So we went to 12 countries in that time frame, and I think that was my like executive community and business course, doing that in a year. That was intense. After that, I made a web series, which you can find online still. I traveled some more, and then I did voiceover and community management at Osmosis, a medical education startup, which has now been acquired by a company called Elsevier. And during the pandemic, so we're like, I am just fast forwarding. So during the pandemic, with my boyfriend, who I just spoke of, Dushan, we did van life, and we traveled throughout the U.S. in a van. And I stepped down from my full-time position and maintained my role at Osmosis as a consultant. I'm still with them as a consultant, doing facilitation and mentorship and development of some leadership roles within their org. And I also contribute to the transformational leadership community by coaching at those trainings, landmark-esque, MITT-esque, Hoffman Institute type of trainings. So that brings us to current.
That's a pretty full life, no doubt.
I think so.
In a lot of different ways. Well, so I do want you to talk about Osmosis. I also want to tell everyone, Victoria is not a shy person, because soon after we met, she said, I read about you and I know your story a little bit. Would you be willing to speak to people from Osmosis and do a virtual presentation?
Yep.
So
yep.
how could I say no? So I did. And like I said, she is not shy about asking, which is great. People should ask what's on their mind and talk about what's on their mind. So that works out really well. So you have certainly been through a lot, needless to say, and I appreciate what you said about the whole issue with the recession. I know that when I worked for Kurzweil Computer Products back in the late 70s and into the 80s, which was purchased by Xerox, and Kurzweil was run by Ray Kurzweil, who developed the first Omnifont optical character recognition system.
Oh.
And all of the salespeople, once Xerox acquired the company, all the Kurzweil salespeople were kind of made to go away, all the people selling their commercial products, which included me. I was the last person to be let go. And they said, well, you're just not selling as much as you were. Well, we had a major recession going on in 1984.
Right. Hello.
And nobody was buying. And in fact, I had sold a product the day before. But, it was amazing what people did. But I've always felt Xerox did what a lot of companies do. They just want the technology. They don't want the people, but all the real tribal knowledge and intelligence and knowledge is with the people, not the product. So what do you do? But anyway, be that as it may, so you have done a lot in developing communities and so on. Overall, how do you define yourself? If somebody says, well, what are you? What do you do? How do you describe or define yourself?
Yeah, so thank you for this question. This is something that I am or have more recently been delving into, because I'm definitely a product of my millennial Western societal. I identify with what I do in the world as opposed to how I show up in the world. So I have been migrating from the doing to the being. So I like to now describe myself. If someone were to say, well, who are you? What do you bring to the table? I am on the page of I'm a strong, compassionate, exuberant leader. That's like that's how I view myself, and that's how I want to be viewed in the world. And if there is misalignment with that, I would want people to let me know there's a gap. I also identify as biracial, as you heard, as an only child. I feel like those are two separate communities of people. I identify as a woman. I identify as, the sacred titles of daughter and soul sister, or like really deep connected friendship that goes beyond the superficial kind of wax surface friendship. So that's how I define myself. I really try not to define myself by what I do, because my hope is that what I do comes through. Like, I hope that you can pick up what I do by how I show up on this podcast, or how I show up on a call you and I have, or how I show up in socials,
Define that for me a little bit more when you talk about what you do in the world as opposed to how you show up in the world.
Yeah. So
I think it's a very important topic that's worth defining and understanding better.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. So I am a recovering perfectionist, if I do say so. Maybe others would say I'm not recovering, but we'll see. And from that, I have realized a few things about myself. One is I have this pretty long-standing story or belief that I am inadequate, that I am not enough. And so I need to prove my worth. I need to deserve accolades. I need to deserve people's attention. I need to do more in order to be seen or be given attention or be told, great job, pat on the back. And that has been up to current, really, how I perceived myself in the world. People like to say, what do you do when you go out to a networking event? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And I always struggled with that. And instead, really what I want to know is, what makes you up? What qualities, what characteristics, what ways of being get to show up that are true to you as a person? And then the rest gets to come later, like the doing part comes later. So I have really been on this page of, how can I be more and do less? Being, for me, strength, compassion, exuberance, patience, collaborative, right? They were just like blatant words, flippantly said. And now I view them as the lens through which I look at the world.
You said something that I want to delve into a little bit. You talked about feeling a little bit inadequate and so on. And not you specifically, but why is it that so many of us feel inadequate or somehow get this mindset that we're inadequate?
I don't have the answer. I don't know why, but I do know. So I'm hosting a retreat actually at the end of this month / beginning of the month. So April 1st to the 6th. And the whole idea is that it's about disconnecting from the imposter syndrome, the overwhelm, the stress, the languish, to reconnecting to myself as I am my home. Wherever I am meant to be, and so on and so forth. And my co-facilitator and myself were, I want to say astounded, but really, I guess we weren't that much, at how many responses. It was unanimous responses that I'm not good enough. I have to deserve my place in the world, basically, is what we found from doing this research that we had with other people. And just strangers responded to this. So, and they were varied in age, varied in all the demographic categories. And I really feel like, I don't know exactly, but technology, social media has a pretty 80% piece of that. I am consistently comparing myself to others in my field, in my age range, who I went to high school with, and I could see them instantaneously 24/7, 365. There's no, you only get, on Sundays, page 6, what people are doing. You don't only get to see who's doing what once a year or at your, high school reunion after 20 years. We know what's happening. And there is this facade. I'm going to keep it real with you. to me, there is this facade, the societal facade of I'm doing more than what's actually happening, and I have to also maintain and upkeep this persona that I am, jazz hands. I love what I'm doing and I'm passionate about it and I love what I do, and but that may not be true. So why are we even saying that? It just feels
Yeah.
like there's a lot of disconnection and inauthenticity.
Yeah. It's it's unfortunate that we judge so much, and we insist that everyone has to live up to some standard. The problem is we don't necessarily do it ourselves, but we want everyone else to do it. It's the old do as I say, not as I do. And
100%.
And that's so unfortunate that we see that in the world. And I think that contributes a lot to it. And we had it before social media, but certainly it's a lot worse with social media that now everyone has to be so tied into all of this.
Yeah, and I think the piece there that is, reading between the lines is accountability, and being accountable for how you show up, being accountable for the things you say and the impact that leaves, being accountable to having hard conversations and accepting, oof, damn, I messed up on that one. I really get to either acknowledge or apologize here. Those things, I don't see those things happening. I don't see them happening in startup culture. I don't see them happening in my millennial, population culture. I don't see those things. So to be outstanding as an individual, accountability gets to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to be in my perspective.
I think that's really the issue, is that accountability isn't really there.
Correct.
And again, we don't hold other people to the same standards that we live at,
Right.
and however you deal with that. And
Right.
the bottom line of all of that is that we tend to make people crazy. And we also want such instant gratification about every single thing that then when people aren't necessarily wired to do that, they're less than we are.
Yeah, there's that comparison point, which again, it's just, that is not serving us as individuals, as community members, as, partners, blah, 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 blah. It's not serving. To be accountable is to be an upstanding and outstanding citizen, in my honest perspective. That gets to be something that gets added to school curriculums and stuff.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate, but it is something that we definitely have to figure out how to deal with in one way or another. But it just was a question that popped up, and I just thought it was worth exploring, because I think you're right that so many of us feel inadequate rather than accepted for who we are.
Right. And that gets to start with us. I heard recently, the level with which you are intimate with yourself is the capacity with which you can be intimate with other people. And intimacy doesn't necessarily only mean in the bedroom. Of course, it means, depth of conversation, showing up in tears, right? All these authenticity and vulnerable moments. So I think that's also just really important to know. We get to be accountable with ourselves first, and then we can ask others to show up too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of one of the things to think about. And the problem is that when we feel inadequate, we also don't really have as much confidence in ourselves, nor do we necessarily respect ourselves. And until we can get over that, it's hard to move on in a lot of different ways.
Yes, absolutely. There's nothing to add there. That's absolutely true. That's the hurdle we all get to jump over or find a way around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that gets back to something else you've talked about before, which is, do you carve out your space in the world, or you just fit into a space?
Yeah, that's a big one that I've been considering as well. And I thought and had been migrating and navigating the world as though I have to fit into what is here. So I need to figure out ways to put my, whimsical, exuberant, bouncy energy into a linear box. And I got into when I first started dating D, my boyfriend, who will now be known as D and not his whole name. I remember specifically this moment very vividly. We were on a snowy hike in Vermont, and I said something like, "Oh, don't. How do you feel like you fit in the world? How have you ensured you have fit in the world?" And he's 6'5", so he's just like a big guy, right? And he didn't even turn around to look at me. To him, this was flippant. It was like right off the top of his head, and he said something like, "I will never work to fit into the world because I'm just too big, physically, mentally, and emotionally. So I have always felt that I get to consistently carve out my space, and I adjust my space as I see it." And I actually had to stop moving because I just felt like I got hit with this profound thought. It was the first time I considered that. Like, I get to carve out my space. I can be big and take up space, and that doesn't take away space from anyone else, because there is nothing but like this infinite space, basically, for us all to thrive and be in and figure ourselves out in. That was just really big for me. So I can't say it's defaulted yet, that I don't, care about how I fit into the world, but I do now try to consider I get to carve.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. There's a lot to be said for carving as opposed to just fitting. And sometimes, though, it's okay to just fit, and it's really important to know the difference and know the merits of both.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Is again, it's with these things that we're talking about. It takes one, you, me, individually sitting with ourselves to reassess the beliefs we have lived with. That's really what it's about. It's like, what are my beliefs around fitting in the world? What does fit? What doesn't? Where can I accept just fitting, and where do I have to carve? And I just, again, back to the social media, and I have to do thing after thing after thing in order to prove my worth. I'm always doing, never being. When do people really sit down and just talk to themselves about what they believe? I mean, that's where the goodies come from, in my opinion.
Well, and the other part about carving is it's okay to carve, but don't carve just to carve. Carve because there's a reason to carve a specific, unique space with intention, right?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
And it's something that we don't just tend to see as much as we should. Well, you've experienced a lot. So if I were to quote Oprah, what do you know for sure? I love that question.
I love that question, and I think about it often now. Okay, so things I know for sure.
I do as well.
Things I know for sure. Rest will never be overrated. Vulnerability is a superpower. Connection and ships of all kinds, relationships, friendships, right? Like work ships, all ships, are what make the world go round, and they get to be prioritized. And then my last one is Harry Potter, any film, any book, and The Greatest Showman will always get me into a better mood, even if I'm in the absolute despair.
Yeah, I have to acknowledge that I've read Harry Potter a number of times and love it. And I tend to watch the movies, although the books are better than the movies. And I'm spoiled because I listen to, I have both the British versions and the American versions, but I love Jim Dale as the reader.
Jim Dale,
who reads the American version. Yeah, he is absolutely great. Yeah. He's a great reader. I know for sure that I have abilities, and I'm going to do my best to achieve them and meet them and use them to help others. I know that these podcasts are a lot of fun to do. I know that when I progress and go beyond this world, I will have at least contributed something, and how much I've contributed will really, as much as anything, be up to other people, but I know I've done the best that I can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Delicious.
And I think that's as good as it gets. I know that I am as much a human being and as capable as anyone else, and that the whole idea of disabilities, for example, is so totally wrong and misunderstood, because disability does not mean a lack of ability. Everyone has a disability of some sort. Disabilities are characteristics. And, one of yours is that you see light. You don't do well without light.
Right.
And that's okay. We love you for it anyway. But the bottom line is that we all have challenges and we all have gifts. And I know I have gifts, and I love to sometimes find new ones, and that's okay too.
That's definitely okay too. And when you find new gifts and you stumble a little bit in figuring out how to do this thing, experimenting, testing yourself, possibly making mistakes, let's normalize making mistakes. Let's normalize failure, for, lack of a better term, because that is how we get to grow. And that is coming from someone who's a recovering perfectionist. So I'm clearly telling you what I am trying to have be a part of my life. But I wish that sort of normalization would be part of it. And when you were speaking about, when you were speaking about disability, it doesn't mean lack of ability. It made me think of terms like fearless or shameless, where fearless doesn't mean there's no fear. It just means that there's less fear. So I think we often use a lot of these words incorrectly and as misnomers.
Well, it's not even less fear as much as it is learning to control it and use it in a positive way.
Bingo,
and not letting
transmutation.
Right, and not letting fear overwhelm you.
Yeah, exactly. That's what came up for me when you shared that about disability.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important concept to really deal with. But we have a lot to learn as a people, as a race, and as individuals. And ultimately, I think one of the biggest things that I think I know for sure is that I have said something wrong for years, which is I'm my own worst critic. I listen to my speeches, and I've always said I'm my own worst critic. Yeah. I will criticize me more than anyone else. And it took me a long time to realize that wrong thing to say. Actually, I'm my own best teacher. And that completely changes the paradigm. And the reality is it's the way it should be. You were talking about mistakes and failure. What are those? Those are just ways of learning and encountering experiences that will help us grow. So failure, we shouldn't necessarily be judged for that, unless we don't subscribe to Einstein's theory, when he talks about insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. If we subscribe to that concept, then that's our problem. But if we don't subscribe to that and we have challenges, then what we need to do is to analyze every time something happens that is unexpected for us, and see if it was a good thing, a bad thing in our own view, but more important, how we then adjust and deal with it.
Yeah, that's huge. Your viewpoint and essentially the lens with which you look through the world has shifted based upon your choice of your mindset. That was a choice you made. You
Correct.
were going along this belief of yourself and of life that, I'm really hard on myself and I should be, because that's how I get better. Whereas changing it to be, wow, I'm a really great teacher of myself. I'm my best teacher. And look at all these opportunities I get to experiment with and improve. That completely changes the game for you as a person, which then almost lightens your load, right? Now it's not so, now the idea of getting it wrong is not so heavy. It's just part of the process. So definitely feel you on that.
Yeah, and getting it wrong, what is that, right? So the bottom line is that we need to get away from worrying about getting it wrong.
Right.
The thing we need to do is to worry about getting it, and we'll work through it.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. It's not about right or wrong, good or bad. It's about being in the process, doing it, getting it, having new understandings, being an experimenter. You remember, like the Ernest Shackletons of old, or even not Vincent Van Gogh. Oh my God, what's his name? Leonardo da Vinci. They were like multi-passionate, multi-hyphenate sorts of people. They were not pigeonholed into one thing. I do this one thing. I am this thing. They were they were constantly exploring themselves, their knowledge, what they knew to be true, what they didn't, and they were supple and pliable in adjusting it. And yet we look to those sort of people as heroes and so on, and it's just not replicated here. So I wonder I wonder what that gap is.
Well, and it's a gap that may be different for different people, but it is something to think about, and maybe you will find a way to verbalize that to help other people analyze their own gaps or their own connections, which is always good.
Yeah, that is the hope. I mean, that's why we do things like this, right? Having these conversations so that we can get what we think out of ourselves and hopefully to touch others, but also maybe even we understand old things differently by sharing them with each other, right?
Absolutely. Well, for you, what are some experiences you have had that have kind of altered how you show up or that you're existing in the world?
Oh, well, I'll share the most of one that just happened, which I just told you about. So you already know this one's coming, but I had the privilege of volunteering or staffing basically a transformational leadership cohort through a program. And so essentially, you're in a room, there's a group of people, 50, 60 people, and they're going through a set of processes in order to understand their own limiting beliefs, strip off some trauma, strip off some baggage, and almost reupholster themselves like a phoenix rising from the ash, right? Like essentially, that's how I would illustrate it. And this is I'm only a few days out of this experience, so it's like very top of mind, but some words or terms that have completely new meaning for me and that I am being intentional about adding them into how I show up in the world include honor, like honor. That was a word that I would think of as, honorable samurai, or like honorable these people in these groups that were super disciplined from ancient times, when in fact I was honored to be in this room with people in their most real, raw, authentic, vulnerable states, and I felt it. The collective room was almost throbbing, right? It's unbelievable. And with honor, also the real definition of honesty, which is less about truth telling and more about honoring thyself. So again, it goes back to self-esteem, it goes back to worth, it goes back to advocacy for myself, it goes back to all these things we spoke about earlier. So just the word honor has come with new meaning for me. The term rigor and being rigorous with that, I want honor to be an intention in my life that I want to share with the world. It becomes rigorous to hold myself accountable because no one else is or has proven themselves to do that, so I'm going to do that. Like, that's rigorous, and that feels right for me. Another one is dignity, and that still kind of stems off of honor and self-esteem and worth and how I view myself and how I view the world. And then the last one is around the idea of bearing witness. And yeah, it was being in that room and having the privilege to bear witness to people fallen apart, essentially, fallen fully apart in a way they may not have ever with anyone else in their lives, partners, spouses, exes, children, anyone. It's a really privileged space to be able to be in there and hold people to that. So that experience is altering the way I show up in the world. And also it has emphasized how much being in contribution or being of service, it needs to take up more space in my life. That gets to be at the top.
I think you've covered a little of it, and I want to ask you if you'll tell us another one. But before we do that, so I think you've talked about this a bit because of what you just said. But what did you really learn from the experience of being on the other side and all of the experiences that you had, and what will you take forward from that?
Well, the thing that comes to my mind right now in that question is when I went through the process. So the only way that we can come back to coach or staff this process is if we have gone through it ourselves and graduated, essentially. And I graduated in October of last year. And being in the room this time as staff, I saw how dissociated, numbed out, and blacked out I was throughout my entire process because of how consistently I was triggered. and how consistently I was stressed about not knowing the answer, not feeling in my body and knowing how to answer the question, like, how do you feel? Or I don't know. I think I feel like this, but I didn't have such a vocabulary of feelings. I didn't know how things felt in my body. I was very logical. Now I'm testing out, like, literally saying feelings out loud. I'm like, I think I'm angry, and I think I'm angry, and it feels like this in my body, and it's like this because this just happened, and I'm doing that specifically with D, who like knows that I'm trying to work on this, so that feels really supportive. That's probably the biggest thing that I've learned is I was dissociated, and what actually being present and attentive and an active hearer, less listener, actively hearing what people are saying, the way you actively hear what I'm saying, and you have follow-up questions based upon what I'm saying, as opposed to whatever has been listed before, right? Like those are things that get to be practiced. I don't think they're just innate.
What's another experience, or can you have one that you can point to where you have had something that happened to you or whatever that have altered your view of how you show up or are in the world? Another experience of that sort. I'll bet you have more than one.
I do have more than one, and I have one at the top of my head. It's way more tangible for those that are like, that was too ethereal. So when I was in college, there's something called, well, at the University of Maryland, at least, there was something called alternative spring break. So you could go on a spring break trip, but it was more service-based. And I went with a small group to Atlanta, Georgia, and we were going to be working with the homeless community. And, like going to a furniture depot, or like a thrift store, going to a men's homeless shelter, speaking with the men in there, going to a women's homeless shelter, speaking with the women in there, going to soup kitchens, being in service. Okay, all of that stuff. So this was when I was, 19. I'm 33 now, but it's still very vivid. And I got into a few conversations with some of the men in the men's homeless center, going into it with fear, going into it with judgment, going into it with prejudice, and coming out of it feeling confused, honestly. I didn't realize what a variety of reasons as to why people get down on their luck. And they're not, and all homeless people are not mentally ill. All homeless people are not drug addicted. All homeless people are not all these blanket statements and judgments as a society we've put on homelessness. Some people had their homes foreclosed and were ashamed to tell their family members. So instead of asking for help, they went to a homeless shelter until they could get themselves on their 2 feet. To me, that was, and I was speaking to one particular man, and he had 3 daughters, all of whom doctor, lawyer, and a teacher. They could have housed him. They could have helped him. And he was so embarrassed and humiliated and ashamed. And that really broke me apart, because I thought, damn, if either of my parents, if that ever happened to them, they better know that I'm their first call. And yeah, my mindset certainly shifted on homelessness, and also on just like the blanketing of prejudice we do unconsciously put on people. And I do have to say it was unconscious, because I didn't even know how I felt about the homeless until I went into that experience. I hadn't even took time to think about it,
Any notion why he didn't reach out to his daughters or his children at all, and just went the other way? Was it embarrassment, or?
He said that he was embarrassed and ashamed. He said he was embarrassed and ashamed. And as a 19-year-old girl, I was like, but come on, you're girls. I didn't really hear what he was saying, which was that basically he was crying out. He was like, I didn't ever think I'd be in this spot in my life, and now that I'm here, I am humiliated, and I don't want anyone to know about my humiliation. That was like very sad to me.
That's a good point.
Yeah, because really, if we don't have community, or even a tiny support system of like 3 people in your life you can rely on, then what do we have? And that just made it very clear to me, like, we need our people around us for real. We got to be honest with them.
And once again, we live in this world where everyone judges us, and we oftentimes aren't confident enough to just be able to say, look, this happened and I'm going to seek whatever help I need to move forward.
Right. Right. So you and I get to be change agents in every day that we live in our intention of sharing what we know to be true in the world and working on our own selves, I think.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think everyone can be change agents. I'm a great fan of Gandhi's comment about be the change that you want to see in the world.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And I think that, I'm just, because I'm a bit more of a realist, I try not to be on the pessimistic side, but I would say I'm definitely a realist. Everyone is not doing that right now. But everyone does have the capacity to be the change they want to see in the world. And I think why I emphasize you and me, because I really can only speak from my own personal perspective. But
sure,
once I become aware of some of the things we spoke about today, particularly the accountability piece, now I get to hold up how I'm accountable to myself, and I get to model that in every relationship, in every community, in every space I fill up. And my hope, my intention is that impact is mirrored at minimum, right? At least, oh wow, she really upholds herself to a certain level, and look at these things that she's been able to do. Look at how she shows up. Look at how joyous and exuberant she is. I'd like some of that. That's my hope, at least.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And ultimately, we can only do what we can do, and we should not judge ourselves, much less allow other people to judge us if we're not adhering to or living up to some potentially artificial standard. Because we all have gifts, we all have challenges, and our gifts are not all the same, and that's okay.
And what a beautiful point. Diversity makes it all work beautifully. So if we were all the same, that would not work. Like life, everything wouldn't work. There'd be no new ideas. There'd be no new innovations. There'd be no new anything. But I have a question for you. Do you find that with your renewed lens at the way you look through life, as you are your greatest teacher, not your greatest critic, that you still have to kind of coach yourself into believing that? Or is it defaulted now and that's what you think?
Oh, it is absolutely what I think. Once I realized it and went, oh my gosh, why am I calling myself my own worst critic? How negative that is. And I suppose someone could come along and find some better thing to say. But until they do, no, I don't even have to coach myself. I don't even think about it anymore. And I will always say I'm my own best teacher.
That's
now,
amazing.
It comes from a background of loving to teach. And I should have realized it a lot sooner and changed my vocabulary. But that's okay.
Well,
at
you
least,
figured it out, though.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm glad I did. I think it is absolutely important. No one should ever call themselves their own worst critic. What you are is your own best teacher, because the reality is you cannot teach me anything, period. You can give me information, but I have to ultimately be the one to teach myself to accept that and to then move forward with it and teach myself that that's a great idea or that's appropriate or whatever. Ultimately, only I can teach me. Everyone else and all my teachers in school could show me how to do things, but ultimately I had to teach myself, which also gets back to I had to learn it, but I can't learn it if I'm not teaching myself, which also says we're probably better teachers ultimately than we think we are.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a ton of repressed and suppressed gifts and capacities we each have because of fear, or just unconscious defaulted movements and blah, 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 blah.
So we were talking about diversity and all that, and I know this is only one part of diversity, and disabilities get left out of diversity, but we won't worry about that discussion right now. What's cultural awareness for you, and how did you decide what you think cultural awareness is?
Yeah, cultural awareness is definitely my thing these days. So it came before I go into the nitty gritty, I'll say, in a larger sphere. I have been fortunate to grow up traveling, immersive traveling since I was about 4 months old. So that's been a part of my life my whole life. And my mom instilled that in me. So I've been to 65 countries and counting. It's very important to me to engage with a variety of cultures around the world, because I am just so invigorated by all the activities that happen within culture. As small as having an espresso after dinner in Latin America or in the Balkans, to as grand as, San Gennaro Festival or a festival here or there, or Holi Festival in India, right? Like those big things. And I recently read a book called The Culture Map by Aaron Meyer, and I voraciously read it. It is nonfiction, and it almost was like I wrote it from my own experiences of working across cultures in the world and traveling across cultures in the world, and how people differ based upon the lens through which they look. So like it goes back to this conversation we've been having. So for me, it's two things. So culture, my own definition, is the accumulation of shared ideals, understandings, rhetoric, cuisine, and history that are attached to a group with meaning. So all those things can be separated, and if they have no meaning, they don't necessarily equate to culture. But because meaning is attached, I think it becomes culture. And then awareness, to me, is conscious competence. So I don't know if you know like the 4 stages of competence, but there is that, and one of them is called conscious incompetence. And to me, that's just the recognition of something combined with not yet knowing much about it. So it's like more than the staleness of observation and before full knowledge. So basically, cultural awareness is a pivot point. It's before DEI. It's before diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. It is, okay, I have just become aware that my coworker is a Jamaican immigrant from a single parent household, that grew up in religion. I have just finally found that out about my coworker, and now I can better empathize with the lens through which they look at hierarchy at work through. And because of that, now I get to make a choice. Now I have enough information to determine, all right, I'm gonna delve deeper into this, like relationship-based co-working, or I am not. And either of those are absolutely beautiful, whichever they choose, but you at least have some knowledge behind it. So that's how I look at it.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me, what do you do today? What's your day job? What kind of work are you doing? And you're somewhere I can hear things in the background. So what is it you do?
I couldn't be at home. I have to apologize. There's construction at my house, and I'm in a coffee shop, so I was doing the best I can. But I am.
Well, I hope it's got good coffee anyway.
It sure does have good coffee, at least. I'm a little jittery, LOL. But I am a community development consultant. So what that means is I offer one-on-one mentorship packages and like for newbie or green community managers, as well as VIP days for those people that oversee or manage a community already and want to supercharge their engagement. So I do offer that now. Also advising. What I am spending much more of my time in is facilitating workshops along a lot of what we spoke about. Definitely cultural awareness, definitely personal development, professional development, employee engagement. And I'm on a trajectory to become a certified leadership coach. So that's where I'm trending toward at this time.
So you basically are working for yourself, doing your own business. You're not working for another company or anything like that?
Oh, correct. That's correct. Yeah.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, I should have started with that.
Nah, no. That's okay. Because I didn't ask it in a way that would lead you to do that necessarily, which is fine. But that's cool. So you're really trying to help people, and I know you've been helping people to create communities, but create self-awareness, which is, I think, extremely important. We all need to be more aware of ourselves. And you were asking me earlier whether I have to coach myself about being my own best teacher, but there are other things that I do have to watch, because in our world today, there are so many challenges. Very, very frankly, I get very frustrated with a lot of what I see our politicians doing. And and I have to remind myself, you don't have any control over that right now. And you need to not worry about what you don't have control over. When you do have control is at elections, and that's the time to deal with it. But I am amazed at what people do and don't do. I was hearing on the news a little while ago about in this state, there's been a lot of discussion about the gas prices being so high, and that the governor wants to deal with getting the legislature to pass laws about the amount that they can profit, that the oil companies and so on can profit and all that, and that negotiations broke down. Why should that be a problem? Given the fact that we all know that gas prices are very high and that the oil companies get all sorts of subsidies and all that, and they continue to raise prices and nobody is doing a thing about it, where's the conscience? Where's the moral compass? And it's not there, which is what really frustrates me, is that there's a lack of a moral compass, but I don't have control over that except for me.
Correct. And you get to choose how upset or not you're going to be every day.
And I can learn to not be upset. And that's the big challenge, because there's so many forces that try to make you upset.
Yeah. That is 1,000,000,000% true. And I'm sure that if people listen to this, there's certainly going to be a school of thought where you can't get to choose, like this is happening at me and I'm reacting and that's what it is. But
there's the key right there. Right. You're reacting.
Correct.
Look, I had no control over those terrorists attacking the World Trade Center.
Right. Yep.
What I did have control over is how I dealt with it. And so many things come to mind. I met a guy, several months later, he joined the police because his brother had been killed at the World Trade Center and he wanted to do in all those terrorists.
Very common. Yep.
And that's not constructive. Now, doesn't mean that there aren't ways to help try to create environments to not have this happen again, but hatred doesn't need to be one of them. And he had control over how he reacted, and I have control over how I reacted to the World Trade Center and how I deal with everything that I do, and so do you. And the reality is that we need to use our moral compass to help us react in the best way possible to whatever situations we face.
Yeah. And something I just recently learned, this is going to be a dicey one, but all events are neutral, and your response, your meaning that you give to your response is essentially what gives it its weight for you. So that's difficult to hear, because there are really egregious events that happen in our world. And I think an easy example is like female genital mutilation. That in one culture is viewed as an initiatory, something that needs to happen in their culture, and for them it is right. Those of us that are not in that culture, we may find it to be completely opposite. Who's right? Who's wrong? What is right and wrong? I think it gets dicey, and that's why it's an interesting view to think that all events are neutral. The rest is up to you.
Well, I don't know that I would say that the events are necessarily neutral, but I do believe that ultimately the effect is neutral for you until you react to it in some way. And that's what we have to deal with. I mean, it's really difficult to say that the terrorist attacks were on the World Trade Center were neutral. They were very destructive and killed a lot of people. But for me, it was, even being there, a neutral event until I decided how to react to it.
Right, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just noting that because you view that event as deleterious for our culture and abysmal, does not necessarily mean that everyone else felt the same way. There were people that were very, very far from the East Coast that don't remember exactly where they were that day, exactly what they were doing. It just doesn't have the same level. So that's
it goes
what I'm
deeper.
Saying, is like,
it goes deeper too, because there are people who absolutely celebrated what happened that day.
Absolutely.
And so we get back to what's the moral compass deal with. And I think that there is a moral compass that we all have access to. And I think that that's something that we have to deal with. But even if you decide it was a horrible event, that still doesn't determine how you necessarily personally, emotionally, and effectively deal with the event. And that's the big issue.
That is the big issue, right? Then there's still that next step of, okay, what am I going to do about this? There's still the choice now. Is someone going to be a cop? Is someone going to go to the military? Is someone going to, talk to their children about what this was and what it meant? What's going to happen now? So yeah, I hear that.
Yeah. Well, if people want to reach out to you and learn more about you and maybe get some coaching or whatever, how do they do that?
They do that by going to adventuresofcommunity.com or finding me on Instagram is one of my most used socials. So that's Adventures of V as in Victoria. And I'm also on LinkedIn. So those are the three most common places I'm at. And that's just Victoria Cumberbatch.
Cool. Well, I hope people will, in fact, reach out. I think you have a lot to offer and you've got some good perspectives that I think people can learn a lot from. So I hope that they will. And I hope they'll react positively to our podcast because we really appreciate you being here. And we appreciate you all listening out there. And please give us a 5-star rating. We love it. Conversations are always stimulating when we get to have a good, deep conversation about something. Not everybody will necessarily buy into it exactly, but that's okay. It's all about learning and understanding. And so I hope that everyone liked it. Please give us a 5-star rating. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Yeah, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you want to, email me at michaelhi@accessibe.com or go to michaelhingson, HINGSON.com/podcast, where you can check out other episodes and you can leave comments there as well. But we hope that you will. But Victoria, once again, I want to thank you for being here. This has been absolutely fun. And let's do some more.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. It was an absolute joy and pleasure to speak deeply with someone. Thank you for the opportunity.